Uh, I think someone came out with research that the foot dissipates about 30% of the energy that's coming into the body, so you can actually deal with it. But if you've got a foot that's not working properly, or even jam someone into too small of shoes, that extra energy goes up and down the chain, and somewhere it's going to push something out of place where it has to absorb more. So it could be in the hip, but if something happens fast and you got to protect that hip, that knee's going to go, or the ankle's going to go.
If you got a 100-meter runner and he's world class, and you have, and now I have a TMG machine that analyzes stiffness qualities of the muscle. Joel, if you consistently do deep squats, I know that the pliability or the stiffness of that quad tendon becomes less because you're stretching it so much with the super deep squats. And then when you run down the track, guess what? You've just altered a ton of free energy return. That is a quick and explosive contraction.
That was just a quick peek into what Chris Korfist and Cal Dietz have been up to in their own coaching, training, and researching recently. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Welcome to episode 129 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Thanks for being here today, and we have got a 1-2 punch, if there ever was one, in Chris Korfist and Cal Dietz. Cal Dietz is the head Olympic strength coach at University of Minnesota, the author of Triphasic Training, and Chris Korfist is a well-known speed and track coach and consultant. Right now, he is a track and field coach at Montini High. He also helps put together the Track and Football Consortium. Together, they also have brought the RPR system into the United States and beyond. And so these guys are up to some big things. If you've been listening to this show for some time, or even if you haven't, I'm sure you've heard of Cal and Chris. They've been on my podcast a number of times. Every episode has just been awesome. Many of the most highest downloaded, highest viewed episodes, and I always enjoy seeing what they're up to. Not only from, really just from a strength perspective and what Cal's doing, and a speed perspective of what Chris is doing. You talk to these guys and you know they're always on the cutting edge, always researching, learning new things, experimenting, finding new things, and it's always a pleasure to chat. For the topic of the show today, I actually wanted to throw it back a few years to the Triphasic Training Football Manual, which Chris and Cal put out together. And if you don't have the book, go get it. It's awesome. It's like Triphasic Training. It's just kind of specialized for football, but really it could be any speed and power sport. And the theme of the book is it's all French contrast, basically, and which is awesome. And in a sense of like, usually we think of French contrast as like the peaking phase, but this program utilized it the whole way through, and it got killer results. I mean, seriously, like these football players were jumping like 5 to 7 inches higher or more. They were running way faster. And ever since I read that book, they became the basis of a lot of my programs, not only in just like a track and field based situation, but even swimming, even other team sports. It is a very versatile system. And so I just wanted to dig in today to basically the makings of that and how French contrast can be used not just in peaking, but in all situations. Also, Cal's going to get into oscillatory reps and the power of those, again, not just in peaking situations, but in all situations. One of the areas as well that Chris and Cal have really been digging into is the importance of the foot in athletic performance training. The show just prior was Dr. Emily Splickle talking about the different ways the foot picks up sensation. Today, Chris and Cal are talking about, again, the critical, just the importance of looking at the foot and how they go about looking at it, assessing it, and training it, as well as the importance of elastic contribution to movement in athletes, as well as some anecdotes with animals. We're also finally going to get into a little bit about the use of the Exogen suit and what is going on with that piece of equipment. If you've been into what any of Stephen Jones is doing, prior podcast guests, he gets awesome technical results with this piece of technology. And then Chris and Cal are going to go a little bit in, Chris specifically on how he is using that in sprint special strength training. So really cool episode. Anytime you get these two guys together in the same on the same microphone or same room or anything of that regards, you know it's just magic. And this was a fantastic episode. I was not only thoroughly entertained by these two guys, but also I learned a ton, and I know you will as well. One last quick thing as well before we start the show. My new book, Speed Strength, will be shipped out December 21st. This pre-sale is going on as we speak. It's already gotten great reviews, and I think it's a really good work if you're interested in getting faster and every single thing that goes into getting faster through the lens of myself and the many podcast guests that have been on this show. So just wanted to mention that. Anyways, without further ado, let's get on to this episode with Chris Korfist and Cal Dietz. Cal, what's the long-term athletic development plan for your son looking like? Is he on Triphasic like junior? Like, what's
Yeah, you know what? I mean, shoot, I do a variation of everything. My new speed stuff that is a lot of bands. I'll send you an email. I like that speed stuff, man, because in this young age, he's fortunate that he's already strong. So I don't have to worry about making him strong getting fast. But yeah, just high quality training at this age, right? Everything, it's that signal from the brain to go as hard as you fucking can, as fast as you can.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding too.
And you're just like, it's like I can get somebody in shape. Hell, I know enough now through supplements I can offset somebody being out of shape and give them, heartbeats that are 10, 15 beats lighter on the same cardio workout than the day before. But you're like, it's that speed that you can't give them anything for,
Yeah.
It's interesting to work with like young athletes like 9, 10, 11, 12, and it's like, when do they get that point where they learn submaximal? Like when they learn tempo, like before that, it's just everything is as hard as possible. It's like go, and they have that's like wired in.
And everyone wants to talk about various methods on this. And I think when he was 8, I literally every day this summer ran 6 or 8 max effort sprints with him. And when I say that, I'm not talking sprinting. I'm talking I would throw the footballs farther than he could catch it, and he would try to run underneath it, and then we wait 2 minutes and do it again, and we'd run up hills. We did all these variations of that. And all that happened was he got a lot faster, right? I did max effort every day of the summer. Like, you can't burn out a young kid's nervous system, doing max effort stuff.
Well, that's like when you put the Omega Wave on him after he ran for 20 hours.
Yeah, he was gone. He did 3 practices. He didn't eat lunch. I went to Omega Wave him, Joel, after a long day he did his mom's camp. He swam all day. He did 2 skating sessions. He ran home. I was going to Omega Wave him. We were going to eat at like 7 o'clock. I Omega Wave him, and it was so bad. It was unbelievable, right? I mean, we're talking my advanced athletes would take days to recover. And he fell asleep before dinner. So he didn't eat lunch, didn't eat dinner, went to bed, woke up the next morning. I Omega Waved him. He was rock solid, ready to go. You know what I mean? But the theory would be that their aerobic system, the kids are built for survival more than like males would per se. So I think in the young age, it appears that they would be more like females, kids. So the organism survives females are built for more survival with aerobic base and that. And I think kids have more of aerobic base when they're young and active. So I think that was the reason for it. Plus, let's be honest, he has no stressors, right? He doesn't have to pay bills. He doesn't have a girlfriend. You know what I mean?
Not that you know of.
Right. Well, this was when he was 8, I think, or 9. And
he's working it back then.
Yeah, I doubt it. But he still doesn't like them that much, to be honest. And he said, Dad, they're weird still. So I was like, all right. So, but you see what I'm saying? Like they kids don't have all those stressors, so I think that's why they can recover more.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I completely.
Yeah, when
my son's bad day is the Wi-Fi goes down.
You guys ever seen the Louis C.K. on that?
What's that?
You guys ever see the Louis C.K. on that? Like the first world problems, basically. Like the Wi-Fi's down. This sucks. But then it's like
it's slow.
You think of it like it has to go to space and back. It's a miracle. You're part of a miracle every day in this, and that whole vibe. Just remind yourself. So.
Yeah, it's all perspective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Hank brought this one up. He was like, Cal, look at the people drive across your campus, the students or the staff on those buses. You're like, they look like they're going to a funeral, everybody does, and then you see a busload of like third graders roll by and they're jumping around having, you know what I mean? That's why they can just keep going and recover, because their perception of life, there's no pressure, it's just rolling,
Yeah.
In most cases.
Hey, maybe let's talk a few training questions here. And
sure.
So one of the reasons I really wanted to get you guys together here, well, outside from just being able to chat and talk again a little bit, was Triphasic Training for Football. I think I don't know how popular it is compared to the actual Triphasic Training book, but I feel like it's one of the best books in terms of implementation that I've utilized, and then clearly the results that came from it. And but how what was the process of creating that? Like, I know Chris, you're a track guy, Cal, strength and conditioning. How did those worlds merge, and how did you guys craft that together?
Well, it kind of started around RPR, where we met at a Douglas Heel thing, and we kind of hit it off there. And I had already read Triphasic, and I still think it's the best book that's out there on training. And so we started talking, and then we started a dialogue, and started talking about football, because Cal, even though he's a hockey guy, he's really a football guy. I think people forget that, even though he wears his hockey shirts and he's got his hockey wife and his hockey kid. And then we just kind of built from there, where we took best of both things and kind of merged it together. And then because I have a whole high school football team, we said, all right, let's run it with these guys and see how it goes. And we had some phenomenal results. And we had, I think, this is off of Just Jump, Matt, because I know people will call me on this, but was it 18 kids that were over 32 inches on vertical jump? I had 238s.
Yeah, I thought you had 6 over 35 or 36 and 2 over 38. And now look, I mean, it was crazy, because I'm like, wow, that, I was talking to Chris, he's like, I merged these things and some of the stuff I'm doing with our ankle rockers and the Chris's the process and the sequence that he went through to make those ankles functional, and he sent me a video. And you hear these numbers, and you're talking high school kids. Now, look, right, we know they're not college kids, 240-pound linebackers, but they're still, how many people have 6 kids over 35 inches? But here's the catch. The hands were on the hips when they did the vertical jumps. So that's pretty legit. You know what I'm saying? That's for real. And it was crazy, because Joel, like, this ankle's so, I mean, Chris, what's the research now saying? 35% of the forces are come from the ankle when you
more
run?
than that. Up to 70.
Well, but like, here's the thing, and I tell people this years ago, when I realized the ankle was important. I didn't know how to fix it like Chris did, but I had a guy that I was working with, Joel, and I made this kid his hips were stronger, more explosive. He could jump higher, but his 10 and 20 got slower. because I made his hip and knee so much stronger and explosive. What I caught though on video was that when on his first step, when his foot hit the ground on that first step, that heel collapsed and it went backwards like 2 inches. It might have been 2, maybe more, but you're like, there's the leak in the energy chain. So all the work I'd done with his knees and hips to make him stronger, it leaked out at the ankle because his calves and foot were not strong enough to hold it. And I knew it was important, but go ahead, Chris.
And the thing, when you squish that heel and that heel drops down, when you go to push and you drive and there's nothing there and it drops to the ground, your shin pops straight up and down. So now all of your force is in more of a vertical vector than a horizontal vector. And so that's kind of what Cal and I are at in the next stage now is, we've got ankle rock, we've figured out how this works, but now we have to really make those ankles really hold well in a horizontal fashion. And that's kind of what we've been working on in this recently. Actually, about the last year, we've been working on this together.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Cool. Hey, I want to get into ankles. Before I forget, though, just because, I think it will to the end of time be debated, about squats and speed and all that stuff. It's like every time I'm just an observer. I don't try to get on social media much at all, but it's always interesting to see people have been posting here's all these people who ran these great times of track and football, and here's their squats. And whether those were deep squats or half squats, especially for the track guys, we really don't know. But people are always going to be back and forth about this stuff. And I think one of the themes that I know I always get at TFC, and I'm in total agreement with this, is when it comes to speed, you have to be really careful about what you're doing in the weight room. You don't just want to go, you can't just go and throw German volume squats at somebody, or even 5x5 for that matter, if they're doing it, sit back through the heels, vertical shin, big chest, and expect that they're going to get faster, and you may get quite the opposite. And so my question is how did you guys come together on the strength and the complex training? And because for those people out there who aren't familiar with the book, for which, first off, I definitely would recommend purchasing it, but it was one where complex training or French contrast was in the whole program, whereas in the traditional triphasic is more in the peaking. And so I wanted you guys to kind of give your inputs on how that the formation of the French contrast the whole way through, and how you guys put that together. How did that come to be?
Well, I think from where I saw it was, as a high school coach, I don't have access to my kids like Cal does. I'll get a 7-week go, spring break, 7 weeks, finals, and then summer football. So I got 14 weeks to get them ready. Because God knows what happens in season, and it's just hard enough just to get them to eat in season. And so I don't want to pound them in the weight room. So I brought it up with Cal that maybe we could accelerate it, and because they're high school kids and they adapt so quickly, that we threw that in there, and it worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, Joel, I'd always done it that way. I wrote Triphasic without it, just so people would build a foundation, but that's how I've always done it. So, and Chris had done it with his kids, as he said, and the results speak, volumes for themselves. And you're just sitting here going, I think people overanalyze a little bit on what in regards to progressions. Are they ready for it? Like, if they can play sports, in my opinion, they're ready for a lot of things. Because if they can stop and start and change directions, there's a lot that they can do. I'll be honest with you. I see people talk about, oh, they're not ready for that or this. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? I'm like, this kid stops on a dime and changes directions at 160-pound body weight. Like, there's 300 pounds of force instantly right there. It's a little confusing to me because I'm not sure that they understand that. And then with the squat thing in the depth, I'm going to throw this out there. If you got a 100-meter runner and he's world class, and you have, and now I have a TMG machine that analyzes stiffness qualities of the muscle. Joel, if you consistently do deep squats, I know that the pliability or the stiffness of that quad tendon becomes less because you're stretching it so much with the super deep squats. And then when you run down the track, guess what? You've just altered a ton of free energy return that is a quick and explosive contraction. You've altered that now. And I truly believe this is why you make a world-class athlete slower if you deep back squat them all the way to the ground. Now, I'm not saying you can't during, let's say, they return to training after the world championships and they're building a base and there's nothing doing for a couple months. I'm not saying you can't do it then, but I'm telling you, when you get into specific training, you may be altering tissue qualities that they must have to run the fastest times possible.
Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding my head with you as you're saying that, Cal, because I've seen it. It's crazy. Like whether it be in my own training or my athletes, and one of my favorite quotes, and I think Chris actually put this in the new book I got coming out is if you squat too much, deep squat too much, you start to sprint like you squat, and what was it the Brooks Johnson, I think it said, like, the person in that 100-meter dash who uses the least muscle at the end of the race is the one who will probably win it, like being more elastic,
Yes.
using the elastic system better, and that's I think that's awesome that you can use the the tensiomyography to like really see what's going on, because otherwise I think people just get like emotional, like it's just like, oh, I did it this way, I've always been doing it this way, this is the best. And it's like, well, here's some raw data and some things that you can actually see what's going on with the connective tissue.
Well, yeah, I mean the tensiomyograph that I have. I mean, I'll use this example. I have pro athletes come back and we test them, and any injury they had, maybe this had some knee pain, whatever, which actually came from the foot after I analyze them. Right, we know this, okay? But the problem is, Joel, every prescription they get is to stretch an area above and below it, and this is no kidding. You might find that the tissue that they prescribe to stretch is actually too pliable. So they're only making the problem worse because the tissue. So that's the thing. You have to test and figure out if that tissue's what it should be. And you might be pushing it in the wrong direction, because I've had tissue that's too tight. I've had tissue that's too pliable. And that's the reason there's issues there.
And that's the problem, I think, getting in when you get into the medical aspect, or just the common knowledge. Everyone always says, oh, they need to work on their flexibility, or they need it needs to stretch more. I mean, how many times you go into a training room and you see everyone up on the table getting stretched by the trainer? They forget that it can be too much. It can be too much, and then you're in trouble, because then that muscle can't do its job when you have to co-contract, when things are happening really fast. And Cal and I talked about this before, that's probably a good reason for a lot of injury is the muscle doesn't have time to co-contract with the other muscles to protect that joint for that 6/100ths of a second.
Yeah, I think I talked to an orthopod, and they was actually starting to realize that hamstring tears, hamstring pulls, a lot of these things are because the muscle couldn't absorb that force, withstand it realistically under a bad co-contraction. Now, where do bad co-contractions come from? It can come from bad training. It can come from a night of drinking, right? And they're fatigued, and the nervous system, I mean, you may be a soccer strength coach, and you got guys that go out, and the next day you have, over the year, after the night of drinking, you've had 2 ACLs. That's not your fault. They're probably tired, and they get a bad co-contraction because the nervous system's fatigued, reaction time's poor, and this is why you got the ACLs. You can't take that blame on yourself because there's a lot of variables. But I think they'll all cycle back to a bad co-contraction is really the dysfunction that's going on, and a lot of these injuries are that contraction. And in training causes that too. In powerlifting training, right? Chris and I both agree that you just strain. And when we say strain, you're just causing that nervous system to just drive that straining home. And what happens? It's a bad co-contraction for running. It may not be for lifting lots of weight. I mean, am I right, Chris?
Yeah, I agree completely. And people forget that up and down the chain, that somewhere some of that energy has to be dissipated. And so if you've got someone's foot that's not working properly, I think someone came out with research that the foot dissipates about 30% of the energy that's coming into the body, so you can actually deal with it. But if you've got a foot that's not working properly, or even jam someone into too small of shoes, that extra energy goes up and down the chain, and somewhere it's going to push something out of place where it has to absorb more. So it could be in the hip, but if something happens fast and you got to protect that hip, that knee's going to go, or the ankle's going to go. So there's a lot of things that go into it. It's not as simple as, can I do a Nordic hamstring exercise and that's going to stop my hamstring pull? It happens too fast for that kind of stuff to have as much impact as we would like.
Joel, Chris brought this to my attention. We have a few articles, and when that foot strikes the ground, I mean, it's absorbing like vibrations of what the ground is, right? And you're sitting here, you're going, like I use this example. If somebody's running on concrete and then they start to run on grass, the first few steps, they change their gait as they cross, right? That's that body. I mean, these came from the articles Chris sent me. That's that body reorganizing all kinds of stuff so that it knows it's on a different surface and the forces are different, right? I mean, that's how fast this thing works. And great athletes in a few steps are probably resynchronized and ready to roll on the new surface, right? Especially imagine if they were running blindfold. That'd be a good functional experiment, Chris, to have an athlete run blindfold on one surface and run right off onto another one and see what happens.
And watch what happens.
Yeah,
I bet they would trip. You know what? My son will do it for $20. He'll do anything.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe at TFC. It's line it up. Have different TFC attendees. A little experiment on the fly. I want to do that now. I'm thinking about it. Like, I'll do it myself. I don't care. But
I mean, and then if the contraction's poor, that co-contraction of the foot muscles, like, look, guys, we wouldn't have hip, back problems, knee problems if we ran on air, right? So then the only reasonable thing left is the foot's the problem in the majority of cases. And this is no kidding. And look, I have my athletes in boots, and that's where we can talk with Chris a lot. Is that, hey, Chris has great running athletes. My athletes are bad runners because of the skating skill that they have to do. But then the boots that they're in ruin their feet. And then my kids with the worst feet, Joel, let's think about this. My kids with the worst feet, guess what happens? If their foot can't stabilize, the body's going to stabilize it. It goes to the knee. Knee's not a stabilizer. It goes to the hip. And guess what their hips always did? Those kids' hips were the ones that were always giving them problems rotating in and out, and the chiro has to fix them all the time. And then you fix the kids' feet, and guess what? The hips get better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that stuff. It's actually super timely that you guys brought that up. The episode that'll be released right before you guys is one I just did with Emily Splickle, podiatrist and foot specialist, and we were just talking. She was filling me in with just how the vibration of how the foot interacts with the ground, and think of like a gymnast down the runway and how they have to pick up on that springboard or that springy mat. They have to pick up every vibration. And if you're out of tune, well, that dynamic and your body in that position, it could be injurious. But it's the same with every step we take too. If the vibration of the foot isn't in sync, and then like you said, that force, it's got to get absorbed somewhere. It's going to go somewhere. So. And that's like
Bosco wrote. Cal sent me a paper from Bosco from '97 where he wrote a whole thing on the impact of the different surfaces on the foot. And it's, the foot's an amazing thing. We don't give it a lot of credit, but it does a lot of stuff, and it's got to be able to change with all that stuff. But because we put shoes on, and even Nike sticks those like air mattress gel things in the back. It completely changes what your foot's supposed to do. Here's the funny thing. What happens when you put air in a compartment and you compress it really hard? What does it turn into? Rock hard. So really, you put those air gels in the back of your Nike shoes and you run on those, you crash down with 3 times your body weight on that heel. That air, compartmentized air gets rock hard. And that's what we're running on.
Yeah, otherwise, if it really cushioned that well, it would probably blow out the side of the shoe, I guess. Or maybe if you super slow-moed it would. You'd see the bottom like bend out. It would have to, because if the air was really cushioning it, this is just me speculating. I mean, maybe it does a little bit. I imagine it does a little, maybe, but yeah,
it has to go somewhere.
Yeah, it's got to go somewhere.
Or get rock hard.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's crazy. I I want to get into with the foot. You guys are talking about the horizontal stiffness, so I'd love to get into that here. I was going to make one comment too, and I really love Cal, how you mentioned just the tendon change and the deep squatting, and I think that one of my fascinations, I actually want to compile like an article on this or some source where it's like, I think we tend to look at lifting, weightlifting, and we just look at muscles and recruitments and all that stuff. But I don't think enough people look at its impact on the tendons and connective tissues, for good or bad. I think there's a lot of great stuff that can happen too if you do it right. But I just don't think that's not like people's first impression. Maybe it's just because we want to see it. We associate weightlifting with what's in the mirror too.
Yeah, right. The strength thing is great, but people, you got to get away from it. Speed is what kills in sports. Let's be honest. You know what I mean? In most cases, I don't know. I'd take a super strong, 280-pound super fast lineman over a 300-pound super strong slow one. You know what I mean? So it's just, yeah. I think our perception is has been skewed, especially as strength coaches. We got to stop looking through that lens of, hey, stronger is always better. Where there comes a point where there's no return on performance, and I can give hundreds of examples. I mean, all the sports I've coached, all 12. I mean, when you have one kid put, I mean, I got one of my throwers up to 440 on the power clean from like 380, and he only improved his shot put like 6 inches. And you're going, how is that possible? But he just couldn't develop any more force with his body type, so he needed to work on max speed. And when we switched him over, boom, he got better. You know what I mean? Doing speed benches, speed, the speed stuff and more plyos, and that's the examples. I mean, I have endless amounts of them, but I just think our profession has worried about strength so much that speed, and so the point with speed is that the only way to have it is that muscle tendon junction, and that how it all works together, and then the qualities of that.
I think there is, I know this is comparative biology, but I'm getting ready for TFC, and so I like to always put interesting stuff in. They're looking at kangaroo rats. Do you guys know what a kangaroo rat is?
Yeah.
I could imagine it from the description.
It jumps 9 times its body height. 9 times. And if you go on YouTube, there's pictures of it kicking the shit out of rattlesnakes, where the rattlesnake goes to bite it, and it jumps up in the air and it kicks them and explodes out of the way. So they did research on kangaroo rats, and they're trying to figure out, well, what about all this muscle stuff? And it really didn't have a whole lot of muscle. It was all this, how the whole thing worked together with all the tendons and ligaments, and that's what really made it explode. And where does most of the energy come from in the kangaroo rat? The ankle.
Yeah, ankle.
Where they have no muscle. I mean, just little strands of muscle. But yet 9 times its body height. That's a good jump.
Oh, that's insanity. Or like, was it like the flea? It's just like a click release of whatever energy. It's just like it's got to be almost entirely connective, and it's stored and then locked and loaded. I mean, we're not, obviously we're not built like the animals, but at the same time, it's like I can tell you when I've been a very muscular, moving person and elastic. It's like the difference is, even though we don't have the tendon lengths that they do, it's still substantial. It's
yeah.
And it's fun to see the difference too, like a kangaroo versus I don't know what animal it is, like a turtle, I guess, is the epitome of not having long tendons, I guess, from what you can see.
Well, but again, the best running animals in the world have long tendons, right?
Yep.
End of story. It's just a free return on energy. Like that's, people have to realize that free energy is a big deal, right? When the foot strikes the ground and everything loads up the chain, you get a free energy return, and you're golden.
I mean, think about that. When you go hunting and you get a pheasant or whatever bird you got that runs on the ground, you cut and my stepdad used to do this. He'd cut the feet off, and he gives you for Christmas, you get in your stocking like a pheasant foot or a quail foot or something like that. There's no muscle in there. It's all tendon and ligament. And those suckers, they move pretty fast. They run really well.
Well, Joel, the thing about that is if you're running and your joints sag like the hip, because you don't have joint stiffness and the tendon hasn't been stretched, let's say, and people have to realize that if it sags because you got all this muscle, then what propels you forward is your muscle propels you forward. It takes more muscle. But if you're more elastic and your foot strikes the ground and all the stiffness is stretched, and then there's that free return of the tissue sending you forward versus your actual muscle, like the tendon, that's such a less metabolic cost in running. And I referenced this study a number of times. I wish I still had it, but when I was writing or creating Triphasic or kind of thinking about defending it, but you're sitting here going, I think it was world-class 5K runners. The only difference in the most elite 5K and the less 5K, and we're talking elite level both, was that at 3K, the hips started undulating in the guys that weren't as good. And that's because their muscles are now propelling them forward for the rest of the race versus the other guys, their tendons were pushing them forward. And that's the joint stiffness part of this training aspect.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, I think about, I can even feel it, and I have 2 kids, 6 months and 2.5 years now, and I can even feel like if my 2.5-year-old is like pushing against me with her feet, like you can just feel the strength of the ball of the foot of a kid, and it's like obviously my kids aren't lifting weights, and but it's like you can just feel how much strength there's through the fascia, through that can push itself into that little point of the ball of the foot. And like what you were saying with the animals, Chris, and or even like animals can push hard too. I used to when I had a dog when I was a kid, I used to wrestle around with it, and that thing was strong, but it wasn't like, it's not like it has a ton of muscle. It's just, I mean, it certainly has muscle, but it's like the way it can and use its fascia, and it's probably wired too, obviously different than we are. But
and think about that. Where does all fascia end? It all ends in your hands and your feet. That's it. It all connects there.
Yeah, with the like what's the anatomy trains. Yeah, right. Like a lot of it ends it ends through that.
So all that has to connect and try and drive everything to those distal areas, the hands and feet.
It's interesting. A lot of training systems that I've kind of been exposed to recently. I know David Weck with Weck Method, and also Gary Marinovich, Marvin Marinovich's system. I trained with Gary a little bit, and they're all about the hands and the feet, like flicking the hands with bench press throws, flicking the feet, like everything, and training the proper reception of the hands and the feet. The more I've learned from a lot of these experts, the more I see that being a huge point of emphasis. And the feet are obviously important as well, like critically important, like we're all talking about. But I think the hands do get a little bit of neglect and I think that's a really looking at the fascial system, what you said. I think that's a really important concept.
Yeah,
especially with throwing, especially with the hands, right? Not many people. I don't think that's been studied too much. I mean, I talked to Zorski out of Penn State a number of years ago, and just how the fingers flick the ball at the end for a pitcher or in a shot putter. Like, well, let's think about this. I use this analogy all the time, as if a shot putter taped up his wrist so that he couldn't flick it. I mean, that shot put goes 20 less feet if you're talking a world-class shot putter. And then if he stands there and just holds it and tries to flick it, it only goes like 4. And the reason for that is the ball's been accelerated. So the 16-pound shot has been accelerated. So it's only a few ounces at the end when he goes to flick it, right? But I mean, that's the big deal, is that little snap. It's the same thing with the foot. What if you don't have that snap at the end that's important? And Joel, to be honest with you, and what Chris and I will be coming out with, and it's really all Chris's stuff, is I know people spend like hours training a foot, it appears in some of these other systems, but am I safe to say with 100 seconds a week, Chris, that people could fix a lot of their foot issues with that performance? Is basically what you came up with?
Yeah, that's what Cal and I have been working on, is this. The basis is just getting the isometric strength down first. And what Cal and I both saw with our athletes is, it was everything else. If you don't have the isometric strength, it's just not going to work very well. And so we have some different foot positions that you go into, that you hold isometrically with your body weight, and then you progress with some weight to try and make sure that we have that that all ironed out. So when you go to press, it doesn't give.
Yeah, that's that isometric strength. It's something I started thinking about a couple of years ago, and it's just like it's definitely what I think a piece that and I'm sure it's been around for a really long time, but I think it's coming to the limelight a little more. Some of the stuff that you're doing, Chris, I know some of the stuff Alex Natera is doing. I think that it's especially training something like the foot too. Like it's hard to just. I mean, calf raises are cool, but it's you could be a lot more specific with isometrics, and you can also probably get more of that, like I guess you call it like that impulse strength, right? Like that impulse at the right angle versus just kind of moving through the whole thing.
And the thing is, when you go to the gym and you watch people do their calf raises or whatever foot stuff they're doing, most of the time they're doing it wrong because their foot placement's all off, and they're actually displacing all the weight to the outside, where they're actually learning to drive off the outside of their foot, and they never learn to come through to their big toe. And so we try to deal with that, and then we change positions so you're hitting all the different possibilities of what your ankle can be doing. Because you watch people do their calf strength stuff, they do calf raises with straight legs. And how often in sport are your legs completely locked out with all that weight on you and you lift up on your toe? Usually when you're coming off the ground, most of your weight has been displaced forward or up, and it's just kind of a finisher. But yet it's the guiding thing that guides where you're actually pushing to.
Yeah, the leg bend. I do. It's funny. Like 2 years ago, if you showed me a standing calf or seated calf raise machine, sorry, I would have just been like, oh, who uses that? I remember one of the other high jumpers when I was competing back like 15 years ago. I was like, oh, I really like the seated calf raise machine. I was like, what does that have to do with high jumping? And it doesn't have much to do with high jumping because your leg is a little more rigid. But like, there's some acceleration angles where you could make an argument. I mean, it's obviously not as specific of a muscle contraction, but just from a raw general perspective. Because I used to just think soleus and slow twitch, but I've definitely been looking at angles a lot more in the last few years and how that does play an impact.
Well, angles certainly play an impact on, because you have all the tendons, ligaments, and muscles that pull over all those joints, which completely changes the length of everything depending on how it's bent. Then you start getting to angular velocities and things like that, something that's completely left out of the weight room. But yet all movement deals with angular velocities.
Oh yeah, completely. Before I kind of want to close out this question on the French contrast work, because we didn't get into it a ton. I think most people kind of get the basic idea of French contrast work and what it is and what it entails. When you guys kind of came together on that, though, one of the things I guess I was thinking about was like selecting plyometric or speed exercises to put in there. And then, so that's one. And then two, like range of motion, like you talked about, Cal. Would it be like practice where you could start it out with a few blocks of full range and then go to partials? Or what are some thoughts on those two areas?
I think we picked the exercises for what everyone would have in their weight room, or what a traditional weight room would have, and that kind of guided why we picked the exercises that we did. I mean, people don't have what I have in my basement, and Cal's got the most incredible place in the world right now, literally. So everyone's not going to have that. So we picked what we thought everyone would have in a traditional high school weight room.
Yeah, the big thing that I think I need to emphasize with a lot of people is that, like, there's no secret exercise, right? But the contrasts and the French contrast, and then I assume you know what the potentiation clusters I do. I mean, I got free articles on them, Joel.
Yeah, I'll put in the show notes for people who don't.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is like, there's like the concept is it's the concept of the exercise. It's not the exercise, it's the concept, it's the theory, it's the method that I feel is best. You can replace any of those methods with any particular plyometric or weight, and you'll get some results. And I mean, I get emails every day, again, people saying, hey, thanks for your French contrast. I'm like, look, I'm German. It was Giles Cometti. I think Giles was the one that wrote about it, but remember Warner Gunther's coach? I think he was the one that came up with it. So I have to correct myself there. But if anybody ever wants to look up Warner Gunther and watch those videos on YouTube training,
that guy's a freak.
Oh boy. Well, he was a world record holder in a shot put, right? For a little bit.
Yeah, for a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, for a number of years. Whew.
Yeah, it's
So
out running hurdles in that video too. It's crazy. Like for a 300-pound guy, it's unbelievable.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's 6'5", 300.
Yeah,
He
Yeah,
was 300. He
I
looks like he's 240.
yeah.
That's
no, he
how,
was 300.
man.
You know what too, Chris? He was only, I think it's 60% fast twitch fiber, or 50 or 40. Might have been 40.
Yeah, I think he was naturally 40, but the training that they did like hypertrophied his fast twitch to the
And
point where
then, yeah,
it
the
was pretty
volume became
substantial.
like 80%, wasn't it?
Yeah, and his brother, I guess, was like more fast twitch by nature than he was, but because of the training, he was able to increase that area,
Yeah,
yeah, to that point.
yeah. They were twins, I think, and he was like a computer engineer or something like that. So it's some desk job. And it's crazy. It was
Wow.
nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys had touched on this. I actually like to get into this because this is something that I'm interested in the sense of we have and in triphasic training obviously there's tempos that are very specific to actions in sport. I think about sometimes like, well, what if we tried to just take training down to its most bare elements, like if we could just pick only a couple things. And two of the things that I'm very interested in is isometric repetition and then oscillating or reactive work. And what's your take? What's you guys' take? I mean, my question, I guess, this is kind of maybe just amusing, but could you build a program entirely out of that if you had to? And if so, like, or what would it look like? Or what pieces of those do you guys really feel are essential and important?
So, Cal, you want to talk about the oscillatory isometrics because it's the program that we've put together. Again, we're slow because we've got 8 million things going on, but the oscillatory isometrics are a large portion of the program, and it's all Cal's stuff that he created.
Well, I mean, I, yeah. So the oscillatory, Joel, the way I would organize, obviously, the isometrics first for strength, but then even the oscillatories, and let's say you just take an oscillatory in deep position. So for people listening, you could take a bench press and go in a 2 or 3 inch range of motion at your chest with high speed. You could do any volume or any intensity really with that. I think you could build a complete program as long as the athlete's also performing their sport. And the reason I see the true value of the oscillatories is really, Joel, it's very specific stress. So I tell people, let's say you're going to do 80% on bench press, and you're going to go full range of motion. You get 5 or 6 reps, let's be honest. Now, but your weakest part of your bench press is right at your chest. Well, if I do oscillatories at 80%, I found my athletes could get 12 to 15 reps at that weakest position, going oscillatories up and down small range of motion, where that's actually more work in the spot that you're weakest at. Now you can, versus the other way, doing full range, you could only get 5 reps, let's say. So I almost triple the amount of volume in a very specific area, which is my weakest, getting all that work done. And you could do it with any load. I do it with small loads. And now what I'm doing is that I came up with, and we'll put it in our speed manual that Chris and I is going to complete. But you're going, hey, I just put 1 pound ankle weights on my athletes, Joel, and put their legs while they're laying prone to do, let's say, hamstring kicks on bands. And I put the band in between. And these are on my YouTube channel, but I put their feet in between the two really stiff bands that spread across the rack. And Joel, the speed at which they moved, and the EMG showed that the muscle contraction was the most they could possibly get. And I could send you a video for your listeners if they want to see it. I'll send you a video right after this, Joel. But it's crazy. At 1 pound on your ankles, the starting and stopping at a high speed range of motion doing oscillatory stuff, people say, well, that doesn't really work anything. It was the highest level of muscle activation I was able to see in any of the exercises that I do. It was crazy.
I was actually going to ask you, and maybe this could go, similar to the full partial type idea. And someone actually asked me this when I did my last Q&A, and I didn't answer it because, to be honest, I kind of saved it to go to the horse's mouth, right? Like, But with the oscillatories, I know that's been in the peaking part of your programs. But like you were just saying, like you can use it to bring up weak points. So is that something that you would utilize like earlier in the year too, if you saw the need for it? Like, I mean, I guess it's for anybody just to go implement that, to learn to be selective. It certainly is an art form, right? You really have to learn when and how. But
Well, yeah, I mean, but I don't think it can hurt because look, you know where your weak point is in most cases. I mean, usually it's at the bottom of a movement or a top movement, but I think what we'll do is, just play around with it. They're more intense. If you look at your heart rate, even with Simpl, like you do a full range of motion for 10 seconds, or you do oscillatories for 10 seconds in the weak position, it's way more intense. So if people just want to get a harder workout, I think it's something that they can do.
yeah, I think about like the anecdotes in triphasic training where people will do like the is it ASFM? I'm a little dyslexic with the two in the middle, but the stuff that's as fast as possible or oscillatory, and the anecdotes of that improving people's 1 rep max, where it's like and anytime I feel like anytime you can improve a 1 RM without actually straining all the time and taking it to the house, like that's money. And that, I think it was that probably that formed I really got into trying to use like just speed, basically oscillating half squats to try to bring up people's 1 RM, and a lot of jump programs I would write, and I found it very effective. Like it
Well,
became something that I really liked.
right, Joel. And what people have to realize is it worked well for me because my kids are usually reactive type kids, most of them, right? But if you take a power lifter
Yeah.
that's a slow grinder, it probably won't work. And he'd be like, this guy's crazy. But look, buddy, you can't throw a shot put 66 feet. You know what I mean? You can barely walk normal. You know what I mean? And not that you're not strong, but you look like a gorilla. You know what I'm saying? I'm talking about, I had 6 foot, 4 athletes that could throw a shot 65 feet, who could do a 360 slam dunk. Those things worked very well for those types of people.
Yeah, they're athletic.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, they're athletic, and it wasn't going to like stress them out too much. Like they were capable
No.
of doing it.
Yes, of course. And that's who Chris gets to work with. Obviously, that's who I get to work with, and you get to work with, and that's what I mean. Bottom line, even though I'm maybe more of a strength guy, but speed's coveted. I mean, that's the quality that is gold.
Cool. Any in terms of so we were talking about this a little bit before, and Hank told us a little bit about this the last time he was on the show. But Exogen, Lila, like the little weighted fusiforms. They look like little weighted triangles.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to get. I mean, I keep hearing so many good things. I just need to get a pair of shorts and start running them. But how have you guys been using that? What do you think about that stuff?
So start with the sleeves, the calf sleeves. Actually, I'm about ready to start research with John Cronin and Aaron Fesser. He's from Auckland and she's from Arizona State, and we're doing research with the wearables and to see the improvement in a 30-meter dash or a 30-meter block start or acceleration. So I kind of got the idea from Hank, and then I called Exogen, and they started telling me stuff. So I bought a whole suit. The only thing I didn't buy were calves. I bought everything else because I thought, well, calves were, who needs calves stuff? I'd rather wear the pants. But what I didn't understand was the whole concept, the whole physics of the thing, where you're talking about some rotational inertia, where it's going to take a lot more energy to move that weight if it's further away from your mass. So with Cal doing the band kicks with the 1 pound weight, it's actually a really stressful exercise because that weight is so far away and that's what you're moving. So I've done a lot with them. I've had some really good, I did it with the girls lacrosse team this summer, and we had some pretty ridiculous results. And then I was telling Cal about it, and he goes, well, what are you going to do now? Because it got cold and I lost my space because basketball started. And I goes, well, we're going to go in the weightlifting. And he goes, well, there goes all the gains you made by going in the weight room. I was like, shit, I know he's right. So I've used them as a running aid, so you're training the rotational inertia, that you're training the angular velocities of the sprint. But I've also used them for form correcting, which really kind of blew me away. was you put weights in different places, your body, it's an automatic change that your body has to adjust to. So I'll give you an example. One of the common things that you see with people doing any kind of high knee action or hip work is they'll bob forward. So in order for them to think that they're going to lift their knee up, they're going to get that forward bob. I call it Ichabod crane. And so what I did was I put the weights over someone's shoulders so the teardrop was hanging forward, and the body adjusted itself because it felt that, and it's only 200 grams, so 400 grams altogether. The body adjusted itself to stand straight up. So all of a sudden I lost the athletes got rid of that bob, which means their spine can co-contract much better, and they have a much clearer signal going down the chain, which will allow them to run faster. I had a kid who rotated too much, so I put two 200-gram things on one side, and so now the body thought it was going to over-rotate too much, so it held the body in place. We took the vest off, and it stuck. So we use it to train, and we've been using it to correct little things in form that I want to get rid of.
I like it. I like see, I forgot what I was gonna say. I love that it's stuck. Like, I think that's all with all the training aids, right? Like that's the magic. Did it, whether training or therapy?
That's the magic.
Yeah.
And so I think with what's different about these is, like back in the 90s, they had the Kolka thigh trainer. Remember those? And you put the 2-pound weights in the sleeve on your thigh, and you tied it to your thigh. And
those are the Don Beebe ones, right?
Yeah, the Don Beebe
ones.
Oh
yeah. That was my jam.
I think the difference is when you feel something coming off your body, you decelerate. Just like with a bench press or a squat, you've got to decelerate that bar at the end, or else it's going to come off and you're going to die. With these weights, they stick so tight that it's more of an internal movement or an internal recruitment. So an external recruitment is I'm pressing against something. This feels so tight to your body that it feels like it's part of your body. So it changes from a intramuscular to an intramuscular recruitment, which is really what happens when we run. I mean, the traditional purpose for lifting weights is to learn how to produce force against the ground, but we all know that doesn't happen very well. But if you're weighting down a limb and you've got to move that limb, and it's just enough where you don't change your limb speed, I mean, I think less than 10%, it's going to stick, and that's what you're actually doing. And I think that's what Hank was doing with his girl, and that's why one of the reasons why he liked them so much.
Yeah, I was thinking about like the casting, or like the putting the weights on like the foot or the ankle as the hamstring's trying to stop the swinging to the shin, and how much force that is as it is on the hamstring. And like, I mean, if you don't overload it, like the hamstring strength that you could get out of that would probably be pretty substantial. I know, like, most like the good sprinters, the sprinters have the super strong hamstrings, can usually do the Nordic hamstrings pretty well. And it's almost like just the ability to recruit hamstrings in that manner and get them strong. It almost seems like that's what makes you able to do a Nordic hamstring more than actually doing them all the time. Just because, I don't know, it's just something that's more constantly there, constant high force rapidly to the hamstring. And that was interesting. I also was going to say too, those Don Beebes, yeah, those things would shake all over the place, and that did cause kind of a weird vibration, I guess you could say. And then like sometimes the weights would fly out on the fly. I don't know what the Lila vest or Velcro is, but
they well, as Cal will tell you, when it's like putting on like a Spider-Man suit. I mean, it's tight, and those weights go on, and the Velcro is the stickiest Velcro I've ever seen in my life. Like, I have them all over my floor in my basement, and if you accidentally step on them with your socks, it's going to be a 2-minute ordeal to get the Velcro weight off of the bottom of your foot.
Yeah.
So, but we've done that. We've sprinted with them on the ankles, and it's a 3-day affair before your hamstrings get back. It's really taxing on the hamstrings.
Yeah, I imagine you really have to like very, very slowly. I don't know how much those things weigh, but I imagine you'd really have to start slowly with that integration. But it definitely lets you know how important your hamstrings are for that specific movement, or like
Yeah.
or like, like if an athlete, Dan John had a good anecdote. It was like, an athlete is doing snatches, and the athlete's like, well, what muscle does this work? And he's like, well, do it 100 times and then tell me tomorrow. And so it's kind of like the similar vibe. Like, you're going to find how your muscles are working in sprinting, more so than probably just doing the same thing you've done over and over again your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can change the equation. You move the weights closer to your, more proximal. It's not going to be the same impact as if you move them more, down your ankle, distally. You can really feel the difference just by moving the 200-gram weight from underneath your knee to down below your calf. And it's pretty dramatic.
Well, hey, cool. Well, hey, before we run out of time, do you guys so what do you guys have coming up in the horizon? You mentioned your speed book's coming out. You guys also have RPR going on. What are some things that you guys got? And share with me a little bit about that.
RPR, well, I'll be all over the country in January and February. So if anyone wants to come take RPR with me, I'll be in everywhere. I'm gone every weekend. But we're gonna have RPR online here, hopefully the next month or two, and it's actually, what do we think? There's going to be 12 hours of video with that, Cal?
Yeah,
Isn't that what we think?
12. I think might add it just because I'm probably a little heavier than everybody, so the video slows down. They said when I'm in the picture, but yeah, but somewhere in that range. So.
So that for all the people that couldn't make it out to stuff, that'll be available to you. And so it is a clinic that the three of us taught together in Columbus. And then there's a whole bunch of side things, tips and all that different stuff that will be in that as well. So that'll be really exciting for us to get out.
Oh, awesome, guys.
Yeah. It'll be great. So.
All right. Well, cool. Well, hey, man, it was awesome chatting, and this whole Skype thing. It's almost like being back all together at TFC back like 3-4 years ago or whenever that was. So I feel like that's literally the last time we were probably all together in the same place. So, man, yeah. I really appreciate you guys coming on. It's great talking.
Yeah, thanks, Joel.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Hey, when you get two rock stars on the same mic, it's always going to be great. And I love that episode. I'm sure you liked it too. If you enjoyed the show, please don't hesitate. Head over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. I would really appreciate it. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology. They have an awesome blog, and they've been a long-time supporter of this show. They are doing great things. So if you have any sports tech that you're looking for, head over to Simply Faster. We will see you guys next week with Coach Pat Trainer.